with the member, and they are en route. So we feel pretty confident we're going to have the meeting tonight. It's just going to start a little bit later. But I believe we're able to do some of the pre-work that we do in advance of a meeting, such as the attorney has a statement to read, and we'll see if we can take care of some of that pre-work, and then hopefully the member will be here post-haste. Thank you for your patience.
Glad to. George Weissong, Assistant City Attorney, City of Miami. Any person who is a lobbyist pursuant to Chapter 2, Article 6 of the City Code must register with the city clerk and comply with related city requirements for lobbyists before appearing before the PZAB. A person may not lobby a city official, board member, or staff member until registering. A copy of the code section about lobbyists is available in the city clerk's office and online at www.munico.com. Any person making a presentation, formal request, or petition to the board concerning real property must make the disclosures required by the city code in writing. A copy of this code is available at the office of the city clerk and online at www.munico.com. Please silence all cell phones and other noise-making devices. Any person with a disability requiring assistance, auxiliary aids, or services for this meeting may notify the hearing board's liaison. The agenda and the materials for each item on the agenda for this meeting was published and made available to the board in advance of the meeting. The materials are also available during business hours at the city clerk's office and online at 24 hours a day at www.miamigov.com. Any person may be heard by the board through the chair and pursuant to the published notice for not more than 2 minutes on any proposition before the board unless modified by the chair. When addressing the board, the member of the public must first state their name, address, and what item will be spoken about. Anyone wishing to appeal any decision made by the board for any matter considered at this meeting may need a verbatim record of the item. A video of this meeting may be requested at the Office of Communications or viewed online at www.miamigov.com. Please note, board members may have generally been briefed by city staff regarding items on today's agenda. PZ items shall proceed according to Section 7.1.4 of the Miami 21 zoning ordinance as temporarily modified by emergency ordinance numbers 13903 and 13914. Pursuant to emergency ordinance 13903, parties for any PZ item, including any applicant, appellant, appellee, or any qualified intervener, as well as the applicant's representatives and any experts testifying on behalf of the applicant, appellant, or appellee, may either make arrangements with hearing boards to be physically present at City Hall to be sworn in by oath or affirmation, or may appear virtually and make individual arrangements to be sworn in by oath or affirmation in person at their location by an individual qualified to perform such duty, provided that all city requirements are met. Also pursuant to ordinance number 13903, members of the general public are not required to be sworn in. Pursuant to ordinance number 13914, city staff may be sworn in virtually by the hearing board staff. Members of the board shall disclose any ex parte communications to remove the presumption of prejudice pursuant to Florida Statute Section 286.0115 and Section 7.1.4.5 of the Miami 21 Zoning Ordinance. Staff will briefly present each item to be heard. All applications requiring board approval or recommendation, the applicant will present its application or request to the board. If the applicant agrees with the staff recommendation, the board may proceed to its deliberation and decision. The applicant may also waive the right to an evidentiary hearing on the record. The city requires anyone requesting action by the board to disclose before the hearing anything provided to anyone for agreement to support or withhold objection to the requested action pursuant to City Code Section 2-8. The Communications Department will broadcast the meeting through all usual channels and avenues. The meeting can be viewed live on Miami TV and on Comcast Channel 77. The broadcast will have closed captioning. In addition, while physical presence is required for quorum, members may participate in board meetings remotely in extraordinary circumstances. A member of the public may submit comments via the city's online comment form. The comments submitted through the comment form, if any, were distributed to the board members and city administration throughout the day so that the board can consider them prior to taking any action. Additionally, the online comment form will remain open during the meeting to accept comments and distribute to the board members up until the chair closes public comment. All comments received will be included in the public record and will be considered by the board prior to taking any action. The city will also accommodate any speakers desiring to appear in person at City Hall, subject to all applicable emergency measures. The public comment options established and provided for this meeting comply with Section 286.0114 Florida statutes. The city published an agenda as well as included in the notice to the public the items and topics that will be discussed at this meeting. Additionally, the public has been given the opportunity to provide public comment during the meeting and within reasonable proximity and time before the meeting. The city provided information on how to submit comments in the notice to the public and on a dedicated webpage. And board members, are you comfortable with all the notice provisions set forth and these uniform rules of procedures we have established for this meeting?
We are.
Thank you.
Are we able to swear in the public?
Yes.
Everybody who intends to testify, please stand and raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you.
I'm not sure there's anything else we can do until the board member comes in, so we'll, as soon as we see the seventh board member, we'll start with the moment of silence and the Pledge of Allegiance. pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. You call the roll, please.
Mr. Collins,
Here.
Mr. Dominguez, Mr. Gersten, Mr. Mann,
Here.
Mr. Parrish,
Here.
Mr. Porosoff, Mr. Vadillo,
Here.
Mr. Ziegler, Ms. Torrance,
Here.
Chair Garavaglia,
Here.
and we have quorum.
Do we have any requests for absence waiver?
Yes, from Mr. Dominguez, Mr. Gersten, and Mr. Porosoff.
Motion to approve by Mr. Parrish, second by Mr. Vadillo. All those in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Thank you. Can we get a motion on the minutes for September 14th?
Motion to approve minutes from September 14th.
Second by Mr. Mann. All those in favor say aye. Thank you. We've already sworn in the public. Are there any changes to tonight's agenda?
Yes. PZAB Resolution 10567 has been withdrawn. That's PZAB item number 3. PZAB Resolution 10568. PZAB item number 4 has been withdrawn. And PZAB 10569, PZAB number 5 has been withdrawn.
Okay, anything else?
Yes. And there was a request from one of the members of the board to have PZAB Resolution 10651 to be deferred tonight. They are stuck and not able to attend the meeting.
Who asked for it?
Mr. Gersten,
Okay,
and that's PZAB item number 9. This is an item presented by the city. The city is okay with a deferral to a date certain for the first meeting in November, if that's
Yep.
what the board wishes to do.
do you have a date that we can add to our potential motion for the November, first meeting in November?
November 3rd.
November 3rd. All right, is there any board members willing to make the motion to defer on behalf of Mr. Gersten to November 3rd?
Also move.
All right, so we have a motion by Mr. Mann, second by Mr. Parrish. All those in favor say aye. Thank you.
And Mr. Chair, just for the record, since this is a mutual deferral, it doesn't count as far as the time limits.
Thank you. Is there any other changes any member of the public would like to make to tonight's agenda?
No
Seeing
other
none?
changes from the city.
All right, we'll go ahead with the first item, please.
PZAB item 1, file ID 9552, a resolution of the Miami Planning, Zoning, and Appeals Board with attachments approving with conditions an exception pursuant to Article 7, Section 7.2.3B1 of Ordinance Number 13114, Miami 21 Code, as amended to allow a non-conforming structure to expand to an extent of no more than 50% at real property designated T50 Urban Center Transit Zone, generally located at 545 Northwest 54th Street. And PZAB 2. No, sorry, that's all.
The board, I'm Megan Eccles, here to present this exception, which is to expand an existing non-conforming structure. This is an older structure constructed in 1946, according to county records. This particular section of the code is what allows for this expansion. Miami 21, Article 7, Section 7.23, which permits alterations and expansions of non-conforming structures by an extent of less than 50% of the total square footage. And it must be reviewed by the PZAB board. The project is located in Little Haiti along the Northwest 54th Street corridor, and it is in close proximity to I-95, which you see on the left side of the screen. Northwest 54th Street is generally populated with commercial activities, And here's a view of the street section of that area, mainly older warehouse buildings. Can you guys not hear me?
Just speak more directly into the mic,
Oh,
if you
okay.
could. Thank you.
Right, thank you. It's located in Little Haiti along the Northwest 54th Street corridor. Here's a view of that area looking towards I-95. The zoning is T50, and then you'll see to the north and south of Northwest 54th Street, there is T30 zoning. So here's a view of the existing property from 54th Street. And here's the side. It's on a corner with 5th Court, Northwest 5th Court. And this is what actually makes the property non-conforming. It doesn't meet the setbacks that are current in Miami 21. So you'll see the building is directly adjacent to the sidewalk or adjacent to the property line. There's no side setback. So the existing floor plan shows that there is a single office space. And to the rear, there is a walled and roofed outdoor area. This area is not internal to the building, and this would be the area that the footprint of the building would be expanding into, so on the north side of the building. So this is the proposed expansion of the project, which is highlighted in yellow. To the left, you'll see the footprint expansion to the rear on the north side of the building, which is approximately a little over 300 square feet. The applicant is also proposing to build a mezzanine. So you'll see that on the right side of the screen, highlighted in yellow, a mezzanine area. The applicant has also proposed improvements to the exterior of the building, including a new roof, new landscaping, and proposed artwork. And so with that, staff recommends approval with conditions, and I'm going to read the conditions into the record. 1, the proposed expansion of the non-conforming structure shall be limited to 304 square feet, 13.19% of the existing structure. It must be in accordance with the plans entitled PZ 26251, as prepared by D&B Design Group, LLC, and stamped by Francilis J. Demond, consisting of 12 pages, dated and badge stamped by the City of Miami. 2, additional expansion and/or modification to the approved layout by the current or future tenant shall require a new special permit. 3, any modification to the approved plans as a result or consequence of applicant's compliance with other departments and/or agencies, conditions and/or codes will require a new review for approval, confirmation from the planning director. 4, any noise generated on site shall conform to Chapter 36 of the City Code as amended, including any future amendments for noise regulations. Concerns or complaints related to noise nuisance will be addressed and resolved immediately. 5, subject property shall comply with all building code regulations and shall not have any open code violations. 6, the applicant shall comply with the requirements of all applicable departments, agencies, as part of the City of Miami building permit submittal process. 7, the applicant shall comply with all applicable requirements pursuant to Chapter 24 of the Miami-Dade County Code entitled Environment Protection. 8, a copy of this exception, including all conditions and/or subsequent appeal of this exception and its resulting conditions and/or letters of clarification, shall be printed on the building plan submitted to the planning department and the building department for the purpose of having a permit issued at any time during the term of the exception. 9, failure to comply with the conditions herein may result in the immediate revocation of this warrant and shall be subject to any fines and penalties pursuant to City Code. 10, the city reserves the right to inspect the site to ensure compliance with the conditions as listed. 11, pursuant Article 7, Section 7.126E, an exception shall be valid for a period of 2 years, during which a building permit or certificate of use must be obtained. This excludes a demolition or landscape permit. A one-time extension for a period not to exceed an additional year may be obtained if approved by the planning department. And that concludes my presentation. Please let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.
Applicant?
Good evening. Alex Uribe with offices at 2525 Ponce de Leon Boulevard. I know that we got off to a late start here tonight, and so I have a presentation that I can give. However, I want to thank staff, and of course, we agree with staff's recommendation for approval. And so if you like, I'm happy to give the presentation if you'd like a little more color as to what's going on, or I'm happy to answer questions and reserve time for any rebuttal if needed, up to the preference of the board.
So let me open it up to the public. Let me open it to the public and see what we have, and then we'll see what board members would like to do. So before I do that, I want to make sure I close the public hearing for the online comments. So can we make sure we've got that?
Yes.
All right, and so I'll open it up to anyone in the audience who'd like to speak on this item. Come forward. Seeing none, I'll close the public comment and bring it back to the board. So the only question I had was on the conditions. Which conditions that were read are unique and apply to this request?
Actually, I think most of these are the generic conditions for an exception, so pretty straightforward. Probably the one that is most tailored to it is number one.
All right. So
And
it's
that's
really only
because
number
it
one. And I
includes
know
the-
I've said this
the
before.
percentage.
I still don't understand why you have to read in conditions to tell the
Because-
applicant to follow the rules of the city of Miami.
So they're aware of the rules, and if we have to rescind the permit, it gives us that standing. So that's why we read them into the record every time.
So if they're not read into the record, they don't apply.
No, but it's on that record if we have to go to court.
Okay. So you understand you have to follow the rules of the city of Miami?
We agree with every condition that staff has put on.
And then if the condition isn't outlined, you have standing to be able to not follow it.
We're not even going to have to get there because we're not going to break the rules.
Okay. I bring it back to the board. Questions? Mr. Parrish?
I have a question for staff and also for Mr. Uribe. So with staff, would you go over, we have exceptions, variants, warrants, waivers in the code. What, and none of them are, as far as I know, are you entitled to. You're entitled to ask for them, but you're not entitled to get them. So for an exception, what is the usual justification for an exception from the city's point of view?
I think it actually depends on the kind of exception that it's going to be, because there can be a number. You remember you had the exception for the dock not that long ago, or you had the exception for the dock not that long ago,
Okay.
where it was like going to extend out into the water as opposed to along the side of the water. So I think it kind of depends on the style of exception and what it's.
But my point, I guess, that's what I thought. But they are not entitled to this expansion as of right. In other
Right.
words, under the existing zoning code, they need the exception to do their expansion.
Yeah, and I think we make it an exception so that we can kind of have the second level of looking at it, or we bringing it up to the board and the public knows that this is happening. Let's say that it was a different style of non-conforming structure, it might not apply.
Okay. I really was trying to.
This one seems
to let,
pretty
because
harmless.
this has been a major bone of contention, certainly in the place where I live, which is the Grove, is the proliferation of waivers, exceptions. They're like a red flag to the public that say if they're not entitled as of right to do this, why are they asking for a special favor? In this case, having seen what you put online, it looks like this would be a major improvement to, which my major question for you is, there was one letter that was sent, we won't read it, and I can't pull it up because my computer's slow, from a resident right beside this property that has a long litany of complaints about your owners abuse of the neighborhood for years and years with trash, noise, rats. I mean, this letter is a very, very strong letter saying that you don't deserve any special exception at all because of your client's previous. So would you explain that?
Mr. Parrish, I did have a chance to look at that that correspondence from the gentleman. I understand he does live block south on 53rd. What I can tell you is that before my client bought this property about 3 years ago, the property was decrepit. It had been abandoned. It was dirty. It was broken into constantly. It had people sleeping in it. All of the things that it sounds like this gentleman is complaining about. My client bought the property, has since sealed it, cleaned it up, made sure that there is no issue there. My client's gotten 13 or 14 complaints for graffiti, and at his own expense, every time he gets one, he has it cleaned up. And you'll know that we can't have any open code violations. If not, we're not appearing here. My client has been very diligent at being a good neighbor and making sure that that his property, even before we get to the development that we want to do here, is not causing trouble. And of course, the proposed photo studio, once we have that property rehabilitated, which we need this exception to do, that's not going to be an issue anymore. And I think the gentleman's concerns are going to be fully and completely gone as far as this property is concerned.
So one final question. On the sign on the wall, it says it was a hardware store at some point anyway.
From what I understand, the current land or the prior use had been warehousing. And so I understand that might have been a depot where contractors might have picked up, their materials, supplies, tools, and that sort of thing.
What is the intended use going forward?
The intended use is as a photo and video studio for fashion shoots. There's going to be a kitchen. If you look in the floor layout in your materials, that's because cooking shows have gotten apparently very popular. The expansion that we're doing to the north side of the building is to accommodate a wardrobe room where you can change, of course, wardrobes and also apply makeup and keep that separate from the open area that's needed in order to properly have a photo shoot or have perhaps a little tiny fashion show inside, product display and that sort of thing.
And with this expansion, how are you handling where's your parking going and how much parking do you have and what do you envision parking's going to be?
So because this is an adaptive reuse of this old 1946 building that had zero parking, the majority of the space requires zero parking. The expansion requires one parking space. We're providing 4. And they're on street right there on Northwest 5th Court. So the code requires us to have 1, we're providing 4.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Mr. Mann, did you have something?
This is actually for staff. Just a clarification. There's a 2-year term that you say does not include any other landscaping permits? Landscaping or demolition permits. How does that work? Do they get those first if they need them and then the 2-year runs, or how does that work?
The exception is valid for 2 years, so they have 2 years to begin action on the exception. So what we're looking for really is a building permit to be applied for. Now, it says that you have 2 years to begin the permit or it basically becomes defunct. But like if somebody applied for a demolition permit, that's not good enough. We need to get to the building stage with the exception.
So the exclusion of a landscape permit
Same thing with
means you
landscape
can't
permits.
just do that.
Yeah, that's
You have
right.
to get
The building is
building.
what we're looking for.
Thank you.
Okay, anyone like to proffer a motion?
I just want to confirm, so the only nonconformity is in regards to the side setback?
That's correct. The entirety of the east-facing wall of the existing building is at a 0-foot setback. To expand it to accommodate the wardrobe and makeup areas, that has to be expanded north, and so the result is about a 6-foot 4-inch increase in the wall that is at 0 feet setback. So it goes from about 48 and 7 inches to just about 55 feet. It grows by that 6 foot and a little bit. That's what's expanding that is non-conforming.
Understood, thank you.
Go ahead.
I'd like to make a motion to approve this with all of the conditions. And just make a comment that it's
I'll
great to see private development go into the section of town that doesn't require major things from anybody other than the owner.
So we have a motion by Mr. Parrish, a
Second.
second by Mr. Collins. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Parrish?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mr. Badillo?
Yes.
Mr. Ziegler?
Yes.
Mr. Mann?
Yes.
Ms. Torrance?
Yes.
And Chair Garabaglia?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously, and this decision is final unless appealed to hearing boards within 15 days.
Thank you.
Thank you to staff, and thank you all for your time.
Next item, please.
PZAB 2, File ID 10566, a resolution of the City of Miami Planning, Zoning, and Appeals Board with attachments approving with conditions an exception pursuant to Article 4, Table 3, and Article 7, Section 7.1.2.6 of Ordinance Number 13114, the zoning ordinance of the City of Miami, as amended, to allow a recreational facility use in a T3R suburban transit restricted classification for the property generally located at 1211 Southwest 14th Street.
Good evening, board members. Can you hear me? My name is Marietta Yeffa, and I'll be presenting for the Coralway Park expansion. This is PZ 208718, an exception for park expansion within a T3R transit zone. So the applicant is the Office of Capital Improvement. The location is in Little Havana. And this is an exception to allow construction of civic recreational facility uses within a T3R suburban transit zone. The property is located in the neighborhood more commonly known as Little Havana, which is a cultural and political capital with a high Cuban American population. The proposed recreational facility improvements for the new public park will consist of 0.14 acres. The neighborhood is currently served by 2 city-owned parks, Coralway Community Center, which is this expansion request is for, and Triangle Park, which is on the west, on Southwest 11th Street. The proposed new mini park is an extension to the existing neighboring park, Coralway Community Center, which is bound to the north and east of the site and will be operated by the City of Miami Parks and Recreation Department. The property will be open between the hours of 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. pursuant to Chapter 38, Section 38. Regarding Miami 21 zoning analysis, the site was not able to be rezoned and is going for an exception. It does not meet the requirements for a rezone of 40,000 square footage, and this is going for a usage of keeping a T3R, but going for a recreational facility, and that's why the request is for an exception. Looking at the future land use map, this will stay, as I just discussed, a single-family residential area. It will be rezoned, it will not be rezoned, but it will be an it will be an extension to the existing Coral Way Community Park, and the proposal does not have a dwelling unit on it, but it will contribute to the parks and recreational level of services and provide more of open spaces for people to use. There was neighborhood outreach done 3 different times. One was a virtual meeting. So it started May 23rd, 2019, October 2nd, 2019, and the virtual meeting was in 2020, June 23rd. They were advertised through the Office of Capital Improvement website and through the Neighborhood Home Ownership Association, various offices. And as of right now, the website is still open to the public, and they've been viewed 52 times. 200 flyers were sent out to the community. So there's a conceptual rendering that was provided to show the activities on the site and to show how it integrates with the existing, currently utilized community center, which is the park, again, bound to the north and to the east of the property. The site amenities will include a perimeter fence, some site drainages, surveillance cameras, areas to play, updated furniture, lighting, water fountain. That's typical. And this is more of a ground level perspective showing what it's gonna look like as you go into the site and into the park. This is the extension, this is the expansion area, and this is what it will look like, areas of active and passive spaces. And I'm gonna read some of the conditions of approval for this one as well. The planning department hereby recommends approval of the exception with conditions stipulated below. The applicant or successor shall substantially complete the drawing set approved and batch stamped under PZ 208718 by the City of Miami Planning Department. Any modification to the approved plans as a result or consequence of applicant's compliance with the other departments and or agencies, conditions and or codes will require a new review for approval confirmation from the planning director. The applicant, owner, or successor shall comply with all the requirements of all applicable departments, agencies as part of the City of Miami building permitting process. The applicant, owner, successor shall comply with all applicable building codes, land development regulations, ordinances, and any other laws, and pay all applicable fees due prior to the issuance of a building permit. Signage is not part of this exception and shall be reviewed under a separate permit application pursuant to Article 10 of the Miami 21 Code. The applicant or successor shall comply with Chapter 17 of the City of Miami Code of Ordinance and obtain a tree permit for any removal, pruning, and or mitigation of existing trees. The applicant or successor shall comply with the applicable requirements of Chapter 24 Environmental Protection of the Miami-Dade County Code. The project shall comply with Article 11 entitled Arts and Public Places of Miami 21 Code as amended. The successor or the applicant or successor is to provide proof of compliance prior to the issuance of a building permit. Pursuant to Article 7, Section 7.1.2.6e, an exception shall be valid for a period of 2 years, during which a building permit or certificate of use must be obtained. This includes a demolition or landscape permit, a one-time extension for a period not to exceed 1 additional year, may be obtained under the approval of the planning director. Failure to comply with the conditions herein may result in the immediate revocation of this exception and shall be subject to any fines and penalties pursuant to City Code. So the recommendation is approval with conditions. The proposal satisfies the standards established under the Miami Comprehensive Neighborhood Plan, Miami 21 Code, and the Miami Parks and Public Space Master Plan. The proposed public park expansion will serve to support the existing T3R, T3O, CS, and CI uses within the neighborhood currently, and will provide more open space and health for the well-being. It will be independent of the neighboring structures while providing options for active and passive recreation. you have any questions, please let me know. And I also have Parks and Recreation here who can further go into any kind of questions you may have, as well as Office of Capital Improvements with the application.
Okay, great. Thank you. Is there any member of the public who would like to speak on this item? Seeing none, I close the public hearing and bring it back to the board for questions. Vice Chair?
Why isn't the property being rezoned?
It's not being rezoned, and it's a way longer process. My understanding is a way longer process. Maybe the Office of Capital Improvement might be able to answer better, give you a better answer, but in this way, it's able to go through faster and actually provide the service that we need quicker. So rather than go through City Commission, a longer process.
And in looking at the plot that on the screen, or on my screen, what is that space? There's the community center.
Okay.
There's the new playground, the original playground that was built, and then the one that we're voting on today. And what is the space between? It looks like an alleyway. Is there an alleyway on this property? This was in my packet on page, what page am I on? Page 60.
I'm sorry, page?
On page 60 of our packet, it looks like it could be a dedicated alleyway between the community center and the playground spaces.
The community center and the playground spaces. I don't believe it's an alleyway. Do you think you can answer
It's
that?
on the aerial E-plan on page 60 of my package.
Yeah, good evening, George Mora. I'm with the Office of Capital Improvement. Thank you for hearing our exception application. So the existing park is essentially a tot lot park. It has a number of play structures between what we call the community center building and the proposed park expansion. There's a static play equipment. So the existing park really is like an L. So this expansion kind of, if you will, creates a very symmetrical, almost square rectangular kind of area so kids can play. So this is just a natural expansion of what's there now.
Still didn't answer my question.
I think you had a slide that showed the green space surrounding it.
Okay.
Maybe you could just bring that slide up. What's that?
I think it's this one.
She's talking about this, I think.
Yeah, I know, but I think his or her presentation kind of could help you out.
I'm gonna try to put it back on the screen because it should show up. So I'm guessing it's in the back.
Yeah, I think between there's parking that services the community center. Between the parking and that park expansion, there's a strip that pertains to the existing park. So the existing park goes to the community center and it goes straight back a little bit of a strip.
You had a slide that just had the zoning map. So you see right there, that one, the one you had the color.
Right, see right there?
That's the one.
That's
What
the
is that
existing park.
strip? It looks like might be an alleyway easement.
No.
What is that?
Go back one slide where it was just or forward. So there you see it's already zoned.
Right there, it's part
around
of
Oh,
it.
I see.
And then
Okay.
this is tucked into the belly of the
Yeah,
L.
it has play equipment
Got
right
it.
now.
And didn't we, when we voted on that playground originally, didn't we rezone that lot from R3, or did that stay also as R3 to speed up the process? Do we know?
I don't know off the top of my
Okay.
head. I can try to look it up.
Okay, thank you.
So I don't know off the top of my head. I can go back and look through.
Just curious. Okay, thank you.
Any other comments? Mr. Parrish?
Again, reading the one letter that came into the board, the main complaint about all of these parks, and we know the city is very deficient in park space in practically every neighborhood. Everybody wants more park space, but the complaint is always, where are people going to park? The more popular the park gets, the more parking is required, and they end up parking in the neighborhood, and the adjacent property owners bear the brunt of it. So what do you, again, with all the need for parking, where are the people who come to this going to park?
I know this is something that we talked about as well, with the parking spaces a little bit to the south of the site.
Again, George Mora. The adjacent parcel that has a community center and it has striped parking for community center use, during non-business hours, during the peak time of the park use, that parking lot is made available for families, parents, children to park and access to park from there. So that parking lot is made, I think it's like 6 or 8 spaces.
Is that to
So
the
that's-
north? Is that the one just to the north?
Yes. So that's made available. 1. 2 is,
Cross which street, I'm sorry, where is it?
it's,
Where the blue is.
the blue is.
Oh, I
Right.
got you.
So that's parking made available. Right across 12th Avenue, there on, I guess it would be the east side, there is parallel linear parking all along that strip. That is also available for park patrons to park. Of course, they have to cross the street to get to the park. On the north side of kind of the community center where, you know, the property that's in blue, there's also parallel parking. So there is, in this particular instance, there is opportunity for parking, even though it's a walk-to park, we know that. Given the park is along a thoroughfare, 12th Avenue, you may have folks every now and then wanting to use the playground. They have opportunity to park.
Like I say, this puts me in a tough position, I think other board members, because like Kennedy Park in the Grove, which is probably the most popular park in the city,
It's a great
it has probably at least 60 parking spaces, and they're full all the time with traffic backing up on Main Highway, on Bayshore Drive.
Yeah.
And when you improve a park, I love the pictures. I mean, it'll be a glorious park, but there's no way that the traffic's not going to spill over. 6 parking places, especially in busy times, it's going to spill over into that neighborhood. And
We're also along 14th Street, along 13th Street.
I'm sorry, say again?
In other words, the North Street and the South Street, just adjacent to the park. We're also providing improvements to the street itself, and we're going to look to stripe and maybe create more, as much as we can. So we're looking at every single opportunity to accommodate, overflow cars that may drive to the park, even though it's a local park, to accommodate those individuals. Parking is always a challenge. We know that. I think the expansion of this park, it's really not adding any structures, not adding any additional amenities that would attract. It's just a natural expansion of the park with rubberized surfacing so kids can play. It actually adds safety zones.
No question. This is a huge improvement to that park.
Yeah. I think it's a good one. It's a good one.
But you know what in law it's called an attractive nuisance.
Understood.
So I really think that that our Parks Department and our city as a whole, when they do these parks, they have to find a way, whether it's parking decals, more bike space, more places, actually buy an extra lot that's within extra walking distance, but as great an idea as this is in a place that needs more parks, you're going to really tick off some of these neighbors, I guarantee you. And they bought their homes saying, I don't want to have to fight to get down my street or into my driveway. I know Kennedy Park, they go up Kirk Street, it's solid with cars parked in front of those residential houses to get to that park. So I don't think the city is doing nearly enough as they do this wonderful idea of expanding more parks into our city. They need to focus on parking. And secondary, they need to on maintenance, because I visit a lot of the parks, and there's always a problem with trash because our populace is used to saying if there's not a trash can immediately where they need it, they just throw it on the street. So the residents that are next door to these parks, they have an unending stream of trash. So that has to be dealt with too, either by fines or more trash cans or more pickup. I just think that the city needs to do a better job with planning these parks, and they need to do it really quickly. And they'll have to put some more money into it and find a way to deal primarily with the parking. That's my comment on this. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I have an answer from Ms. Torrens. It looked like it was rezoned in 2014.
I'm sorry?
It appears that the park portion was rezoned in 2014.
So we did rezone that before they built the playground there. It was rezoned for the playground.
I believe so,
Yeah,
yes.
it came before us.
I remember, but I
Yeah.
didn't know if it was being fast-tracked like this was, or we had actually gone through a zoning change on it.
Okay.
Thanks.
Just a question, can a private entity rent this park?
This would be more,
Or portion of the park?
Good evening. Good evening, Nadia Arguelles, Parks and Recreation. Thank you for hearing us today in our request. I believe that this park is not a permittable park where we do issue events.
So is that you believe, or
No, it is not at this time.
at this time? Is it contemplated? Because part of me was saying that maybe we should throw a condition in there that it not be ever rentable, to just keep the
Okay.
opportunity for an event to be, someone to rent it for a birthday party, and you have 50 kids and 50 parents who are looking for parking space, and really push so that it's a walkable neighborhood park, not the park that people rent from other communities, and you really push the parking problem. So I mean, I don't know if someone wants to just throw that in there as an amendment, if the motion, if there's a motion.
Go ahead.
I'll make a motion to approve with those conditions?
Second?
So that includes my friendly condition?
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Chairwood,
Go ahead, Mr. Parrish.
I'm just wondering if the parking does get out of control with this neighborhood, and many complaints, I mean, I don't know how to actually to put this into a condition, but whether the hours should be restricted until, again, that parking, that little six parking lot is available. But I'm really worried that this is going to really burden this neighborhood with the immediately adjacent neighbors. So I'd like to I just don't know how to craft that. If anybody has any ideas on how we'd say if the parking becomes obviously a nuisance to the adjoining neighbors, that the city will have to address either the hours of operation or find additional parking, which you've got a major facility across the street. They might have to work with I guess the Catholic Church over there, or who is it?
I think it's St. Peter and Paul School.
So they'd have to work a parking agreement with them. But yeah, I'm very much in favor of this park, but I just know that this is going to cause a problem for the neighbors.
Is there a residential parking program on these streets with permit only? Maybe you could say the city should sponsor residential parking.
That's a good solution,
For-
yes.
for-
Second condition then,
For
that there
14th
should be residential parking only signs or even permits for the 13th Street and 14th Street. Particularly 14th Street, maybe just 14th Street.
All right, so the maker of the motion agree to those?
I would.
Two?
So that would the two conditions, one, that it not be rentable to third parties, and secondly, that the nearby residents can have permits, parking permits.
noted.
Restricted parking.
Restricted parking and their permits allowing them to park there only.
Okay, noted.
City, you comfortable with the two additions? Either yes or,
I want to just make sure I have it
Okay.
correct. You wanted to add a condition that this not be rentable to third parties, and then I got a little lost on the second one. Was that I believe Mr. Parrish had phrased residential sign for parking on 14th Street?
There'll
But
be
Mr. Mann, you had changed-
restricted to residential parking, only not for park use on that street, and so that the neighbors will be protected.
so what is the program that's,
Which street?
hold on.
That's
Hold on.
14th.
Give me 1 sec. What is the program that the city has for residents for parking permits? What's that program called?
I'm not sure this time. Okay.
I'm going to let the deputy director answer that.
Good evening, Jeremy Karros-Gauger, Assistant Director for the Planning Department. So this is actually, it's administered, I believe, by the parking authority, and they have a residential parking program.
Okay.
And it's set up by the residents. There has to be like a majority of the residents in the neighborhood requesting it to the parking authority.
So I would, friendly amendment, just to reword your thing, is that the city should facilitate and implement the residential parking program for
14th Street,
14th Street.
between Southwest 27th Avenue and Southwest, whatever that one is to the,
12th Avenue and 13th Avenue.
I want to reiterate that it has to be at a
12th Avenue.
request from the neighborhood.
That's why I said facilitate.
Okay,
So you guys would go out there and help sponsor the initiative.
thank you.
That's fine, that works.
So we have a motion by Mr. Mann, second by Mr. Parrish.
oh,
I'm sorry? Oh, second by Ms. Torrance, Vice Chair. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Mann,
Yes.
Ms. Torrance,
Yes.
Mr. Collins,
Yes.
Mr. Parrish,
yes.
Mr. Vadillo,
Yes.
Mr. Ziegler,
Yes.
and Chair Garbaglia.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously, and this decision is final unless appealed to hearing boards within 15 days.
Thank you.
Thank you.
PZAB item number 6, file ID 9460, a resolution of the Miami Planning, Zoning, and Appeals Board recommending approval of an ordinance of the Miami City Commission amending ordinance number 10544 as amended, the Miami Comprehensive Neighborhood Plan of the City of Miami, Florida, pursuant to the expedited state review process, subject to section 163.3184 Florida statutes, by adding a property rights element as required by section 163.317761 Florida statutes.
Before we start, I just want to check with the members of the audience. What items are you all for? Are we doing them in the right order? Are these, I don't know, this couple over here, what item are you here for? Is that one still before us? So you're just hanging out? Okay. Okay, so we'll just take it. I just wanted to make sure if there was anyone we can get out of here early. We're good. All right, go ahead, please.
Good evening. Can you hear me all right with the mask? All right, thank you. My name is Sue Trone. I am the Chief of Comprehensive Planning for the City of Miami. I am here this evening to introduce to you legislation that we're bringing forward that creates a new element to the Miami Comprehensive Neighborhood Plan. So this element is being introduced into the comprehensive plan as a requirement of state statute. At the end of June, the governor signed a bill that the state legislators put out that states every local government has to do this. So all of the local governments throughout the state are very busy doing this, what we're doing tonight, to get this adopted. So I'm going to do something I have never done before. And, well, this is the quick summary. It's one page long. There's no goals, objectives, or policies. And it essentially asserts our respect for private property rights and decision-making. So this is the big thing I've never done before. And this is the entire element. It's here on one slide. So On one hand, it's a grand slide, but this is going to be the shortest element. It is available, it is in your agenda packet. And what is probably the sort of the nugget of this is the enumerated pieces. It's essentially how the statute tells us we are to respect property rights, essentially to respect them in how people possess the property rights, that people can use them and have it to sell or for the exclusion of others on their properties. And that's essentially the entire element in its entirety for you to see. And so we are here tonight from staff recommending your vote of approval. And that's really the entirety of my presentation. I'm here to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. Is there any member of the public who'd like to speak on this item? Seeing none, bringing it back to the board. Mr. Parrish?
So Sue, thank you for bringing this. Zoning rights are implemented since what? That famous case, the Supreme Court case from the 20s, to balance individual property rights against communal property rights, otherwise known as neighborhood property rights. So you don't have a oil derrick next to your single-family home. I mean, or whatever. That's would be an extreme. Apparently, it happens in Houston. Anyway, does this element, in your estimation, begin to blur the line between private property rights and the communal rights where the property is located?
No.
So it's not just going to add this more NIMBYism into our code?
No, it's really a statement just reminding us to think of property rights in decision-making.
So where did this come from? I mean, what is the legislative history of this seemingly innocuous new element?
It's a very, I love the question. I've wondered at it myself. I will tell you, I've spent a few hours on the phone with the Department of Economic Opportunity, and in September, I attended the local, the state chapter for the American Planning Association. Their annual conference was in Miami this year. And I attended the sessions where people talked about this. I don't have an answer for your question. So I'm also scratching my head. It was legislation that came out. And I've worked closely with the Office of the City Attorney in drafting the language. I will also tell you I follow very closely, I don't know if you're familiar with this group, the Thousand Friends of Florida. There's some model language that came from there which got a little artistic with this, and I was kind of discouraged from doing that because when you deviate from this language, the reviewing agency, essentially the DEO, is rejecting some of that because they're kind of like, the legislation says, adopt this element, and so adopt this language. So what I understand essentially is the best practice is to essentially adopt the language from the statute as is.
It's just peculiar.
It's an assertion of respect for property rights, pure and simple.
I have ultimate respect for property rights. And if this was on McDonald's, it would be called Nothing Burger. We'd order a Nothing Burger, and I hope that's what it is. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Does this in any way, shape, or form extend to traffic density?
Can you ask that again? I didn't understand. I couldn't.
Property rights, it says to control his interests, his or her interests in the property, including easements, etc. Does that at all include controlling what happens immediately in front of your property. And for example, the right to have a say as to how much traffic density is appropriate for that location? Or is that completely outside of the purview of this?
I mean, I don't know if I understand exactly what you're getting at, but let me see if I could get there, because I think perhaps number 2 might get at it, because it says essentially the right of a property owner to use, maintain, develop, and improve his or her property for personal use or for the use of any other person. And here's the caveat: subject to state law and local ordinances. So our local ordinances regulate density. So you can't circumvent that.
So it has absolutely nothing to do with what happens immediately outside of your property line.
If it's my private property and your property is in front of my property, I can't tinker with your property. Is that helpful? If it's not my property, I can't. Then it sounds like it's kind of like the rights of my property end where your rights to your property begin. Because then they're your property rights. Your density is yours, my density is mine.
Yeah, I can tell I'm not going to get anywhere with this at all. All right, thank you.
Sorry.
I think it's the reverse. I think what this is doing is the state setting the ground to take away local jurisdiction.
Yeah, it's
taking away local jurisdiction by saying the property owner is king, and they should be able to do what they need to do on their property and reduce the amount of local intrusion to their property rights.
If I could throw a lifeline, I agree with you. I think this is the trend of Tallahassee to say, city, local government, back off. We've got this. We'll take care of it. And this is to respect the rights of the individual property owners, like where they took away the tree ordinances, basically. This is the continual assault on municipal government and county government, that type of thing.
I agree.
But as currently written, it's just a statement that we are to consider the private property rights of the individuals before.
It's just like the redundant conditions you put in all your items, right? It's just restating the law.
We think it's important, sir.
Yes, all right.
One last comment then. Thank you, Mr. Chair, because that goes to the heart of what this Planning and Zoning Board sent to our commission, which is legislation to strengthen the definition of neighborhoods so that the state can't come in and say that neighborhoods don't count. And now everybody can max out, forget the tree ordinances, forget everything. We can just, if your tree ordinance conflicts with what we're doing in Tallahassee, you don't have a tree ordinance anymore. I can see that happening. I hope it doesn't go there. But in the Magic City and in the Magic State, who knows what will happen? Thank you.
Okay, motion by, motion.
Motion to approve item 8.69460.
What item? That's item, why don't I see that?
Item 6.
Item 6, okay. I couldn't get your numbers.
Sorry.
All right, so we have a motion to approve item 6 by the vice chair. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Vadillo. Call the roll, please.
Ms. Torrance?
Yes.
Mr. Vadillo?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mr. Parrish?
No.
Mr. Ziegler?
Yes.
Mr. Mann?
yes.
Chair Garavaglia?
No.
Motion passes by a vote of 5-2.
Which is a supermajority.
Thank you for the interesting conversation and your time this evening.
Thank you.
The thing that wasn't mentioned, though, was that had you not approved this, we wouldn't have been able to approve any comprehensive plans moving forward. So that was the real teeth that the Tallahassee.
You should have said that before we voted. That would have been interesting.
I
That
was
would have been
sweating
an interesting vote then.
So then it would be an adhesion contract, right?
Sort of.
Where you have to do it or we kill you.
It's good to be the king, basically.
PZAB 7, File ID 9558, a resolution of the Miami Planning, Zoning, and Appeals Board recommending approval to the Miami City Commission of an ordinance of the Miami City Commission amending Chapter 35, Article Section 35-290 of the Code of the City of Miami, Florida, as amended, titled Motor Vehicles and Traffic Private Parking Lots, Compliance with the Interim Parking in Chapter 62, Article 13, Division 4, and Chapter 62, Article 13, Division 4, Section 62-543, titled Planning and Zoning Approval for Temporary Uses and Occupancies, Interim Parking, Temporary Permit Required for Approval to reestablish the former temporary interim parking program to allow for conditionally unimproved and partially improved parking lots on private property.
Do we have someone from the city? Who's up to bat? We can just go to the next item if you want.
PZAB 8, File ID 10619, a resolution of the Miami Planning, Zoning, and Appeals Board recommending approval to the City Commission of an ordinance of the Miami City Commission amending Ordinance 13114, the zoning ordinance of the City of Miami, Florida, as amended, to amend Appendix C, Midtown Overlay District, Section 627.1.6, titled Building Placement and Buildable Area, Section 627.1.7, titled Maximum Height, Build to, Minimum Setback, and Use Requirements.
Good evening.
Cardinals are right there, 1 and 2. Give those.
Sorry about that. Good evening. St. Louis is winning. So I'm here to talk about the Midtown overlay and the Appendix C text amendment that's before you. So we're talking about a project that's and a project site that's the Gateway site. So that's the location. And this is the context for the surrounding zoning. So it's worth noting that there's been a number of zoning changes since the Midtown site was originally approved, which predates Miami 21. So, you know, you can imagine that was a bit of an island of a development when it took place on the old FEC rail yards. And obviously, we're under a very, very different context now. The T636A locations all to the east. That was not the regulations at the time. The design district changed to the north. Even I believe the previous zoning had similar tall structures allowed closer to the freeway on the northeast quadrant there. But there's been a number of changes since Midtown was originally approved. So the meat of this change is really, there's a couple of places where the text changes to state we're going from what the SD 27 overlay, special overlay district, which set a max height at 350 and 33 stories. And now we're suggesting that the max height as permitted in the underlying zoning, which is actually taller than what the special overlay district allows. So this is more or less gives you an idea of what the SD 27 permits of a maxed out FLR, and this is what a change would allow. So the FLR doesn't change, so the overall mass of the building doesn't change, but it can go taller, so you end up with a narrower, taller structure. So this is what it would be shown maxed out FLR in context. It should be showing.
We don't see anything.
Oh, all of this for naught. Okay. Thank you. What's the magic button? Control.
Your explanation is so clear, Jeremy, that we're following it completely.
You know, it's one of the function keys. F7. Oh. What's the magic one? Okay, duplicate. There we go. Thank you, sir. Lifesaver. Okay. There's the site. That's the gateway site. Thank you. There's the surrounding zoning that I walked through before. Again, that T636 wasn't there. None of it was listed in this format anyway. They would have been R4s and other things that had more separated uses under the previous ordinance. And then we get to the meat in the text of this. So basically saying it can be as tall as the underlying zoning. In this case, you've got a good side-by-side comparison of what would be allowed. Again, same building massing, but in order for them to take advantage of additional height, it would need to be a smaller floor plate. And there it is in context with the existing context. And I'm gonna set you up on here. The next slide is theoretical only. There's a lot of practical reasons it would never look like this, but that is the theoretical maximum build out. Completely, you know, there's a lot of practical issues here, right? Nobody's gonna do a tower with 3,000 square feet of floor plate. But that does give you a sense of that there are that T636 massing to the east, the build out along 95 with the 24, which looks a little more realistic, except for some of those pencil towers. And this assumes no site assemblies. This is just based on existing. So, is that enough caveats? And that's that. So, coming back to the text.
Anyone in the public like to speak on this item? Seeing none, bring it back to the board. Motion, comment?
Just one comment. Jeremy, that last slide of the maximum build out, I wouldn't show it to some of the community activists who've been here over the years.
I wouldn't show it to developers.
Anybody with Gridix can run that number and test it, actually.
So essentially, all you're doing is making sure that it lines up properly with the existing height limits today.
I think this makes it more compatible with the neighborhood, actually, than, you know, it's going to be a little bit taller than the rest of the existing towers that are already built in Midtown. but not drastically so. So I think it's good transitional zoning, the transect.
Motion?
Motion to approve. as
Motion by
presented.
Mr. Vadillo to approve, second by
Second.
Mr. Mann. Please call the roll.
Mr. Vadillo?
Yes.
Mr. Mann?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mr. Parrish?
Yes.
Mr. Ziegler?
Yes.
Ms. Torrance?
Yes.
And Chair Garavaglia?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
JRB, please don't show us slides like that again. No, it's disturbing.
Yes, sir. Outdoor dining, we moved that, although I had a whole presentation ready to go. Next on the agenda is an amendment to
You want to read it into the
Yeah,
agenda?
read it into the record, please.
PZAB 10, File ID 10653, a resolution of the Miami Planning, Zoning, and Appeals Board recommending approval of an ordinance of the Miami City Commission to amend ordinance number 13114, the zoning ordinance of the City of Miami, Florida, as amended, more specifically by amending Appendix A, Section A.2, Village West Island District and Charles Avenue, and CD2.
So this is a text amendment to the NCD2 ordinance. This is in response to a commission directive to improve the process on how projects have historically been handled on Charles Avenue. Our proposal is to move this from the purview of the Urban Development Review Board over to the Historic Environmental Preservation Board. Really critical to recognize this is placing the HEP board, which is typically quasi-judicial, limiting them to an advisory role only. So it's the exact same process that exists today. It's just a different group looking at it. And the reason we recommend that change is because this is a typical UDRB application. They are mandated to look at projects over a certain size for urban compatibility, for applying essentially good urban design practice to projects. And this is a project that is more typical of what the HEP board reviews. So the HEP board, most of the projects they review are single-family homes. Obviously, there are commercial and large-scale historic buildings in the city as well, but the vast majority of what they do month to month is single-family home review. And then this is Charles Avenue. So Charles Avenue, it's a real outlier compared to everything else that UDRB looks at on a typical basis. And the other thing that the HEP board is very accustomed to is applying design guidelines. So specific design guidelines that are meant to be of a certain style, certain architectural style, that is what they do. It's their bread and butter. Again, it's not something that the Urban Development Review Board applies typically. So this is going to place this in the responsibility of a board and group of architects. There are a number of registered architects on the board to review something that's essentially, it's in their wheelhouse as opposed to it really being an outlier of what UDRB typically does. And I'm available for questions on this one.
Opening up to the public. Anyone in the public for this item?
Hi, good evening. My name is Michael March. I live at 3586 Charles Avenue. I live in a shotgun shack, which was built in 1935. My home was individually designated by the city of Miami, but I appealed that designation. I have no plans to tear my home down. But when I sweep up the termite dust in my house every day, I want to be doing that by choice. I don't want to be forced into it, whether it's by the city, the county, or the national government. And keeping an old house like mine is a labor of love. And a wooden house is harder to maintain than some of these fancier historically designated homes that we have in other parts of town, okay? So in response to what Jeremy said, he said the processes will be very similar. Well, I'll argue with that because I know that the historic board goes into a lot more detail into the homes. I've watched both hearings, UDRB, and the UDRB does not get into how many panes of glass your window has, okay? They don't get into what kind of tiles you have on your roof, okay? It was wrong of the PZAB to allow the commercial upzoning for the Grove Inn on my street of Charles Avenue. It should not have mattered that this project was sponsored by the West Grove legacy family of the Stirrups. And since this upzoning passed, it has begun a domino effect of commercial intrusion into the West Grove. It's begun a trend of commercial intrusion into the West Grove, an area which is supposedly so special it got its own NCD. After allowing this commercial intrusion, it is hypocritical of the PZAB to heap higher regulations on those of us homeowners who will be left in between all this new commercialization. Bear in mind, I was grateful to the 3 out of 9 PZAB members who voted against the recent upzoning on Charles Avenue, even though it passed. This is already a historically designated corridor where homes older than 50 years old, like mine, cannot be demolished without approval from the Historic Preservation Officer. This new measure, which takes the review of new construction on Charles Avenue away from the UDRB and gives it to the HEP, was originally part of the NCD amendments, except back in that form, the move would have affected all of the NCD2, or the West Grove. Then, revised versions of the NCD amendments downgraded it to UDRB requirement, again, for all of the NCD2. Thankfully, for those of us in the West Grove, the NCD amendments have stalled. Its sponsor promised to bring some of them back in piecemeal form. And here is one of them tonight. He's trying to save face now that you and he passed the Grove Inn project. And the county plan for the Playhouse may be getting back on track. This legislation targets my street of Charles Avenue only. We are currently the only ones among single-family homeowners, as Jeremy pointed out, who are subject to the UDRB. And an upgrade to HEP approval would mean even worse, in my opinion. That would be even worse, in my opinion. The 2 new modern homes on my street probably wouldn't have been as easily passed by the HEP board, although their UDRB passage was not easy either. Going before any review board is very costly and time-consuming for a homeowner. It requires both an attorney and an architect. Okay, and it may even need a landscape architect. As part of a historical corridor, homeowners on my street are already required to get a costly archaeological survey, just to build a fence, much less if we want to make an addition to our home or rebuild. Getting approval from the HEP board on new construction will involve a much more detailed and costly process than the one required to get UDRB approval. I personally have no problem with the 2 new houses on my street and want the residents of Charles Avenue, new and old, black and white, to be able to build the homes they want, just as they could in the South Grove. There are still some Bahamian American legacy families left on my street, and I want those families remaining to be able to live in the present, not in the past. I want them to live in the homes of their liking. I would like to remind the members of the PZAB that there are many modern new homes in the immediate area of Charles Avenue, one of which borders our Charlotte Jane Memorial Cemetery. And this home I mentioned, on the adjacent street of Franklin Avenue, is owned by a member of the Gibson family, which is considered a legacy family of the West Grove. This shows that not all Bahamian Americans want to live in a house that looks like Jimmy Buffett built it. Please vote no on PZAB item 10.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Guillermo de la Paz. I live in 3441 Charles Avenue. I don't know how to start, but Charles Avenue is a small street. It's 19 feet wide compared to a 25 feet wide street. There is 64 homes, 11 empty lots, and 3 churches. And I want you to look at this audience and see how many neighbors are here. There's no notification for the government. There's no meetings. There's nothing. And if anybody has a doubt, what can a historic home imposed by the government can do for a family, let me share some numbers with you. A couple of years back, 53 homes were trying to be designated historic. 2 of those houses are in Charles Avenue. 3420 Charles Avenue was sold for $19,000. $19,000 because it was designated historic. 3603 Charles Avenue just sold this year for $200,000. I do real estate for a living. This is the best time in the past 10 years to get a line of credit on your property, to get your equity and go buy something else. So basically what the government tried to do is telling these families, the 64 homes and 11 empty lots, you're gonna own a property that you have to go in front of the headboard, and the guys on the next block, they don't have to do it. I don't think it's a role of the government to tell people how they should live and put in restrictions on their property. I don't think that's the role of the government. The role of the government should be to fix the street. We should have big holes, to create parks, to bring capital improvement. This is an attack to the owners of Charles Avenue for them to lose equity and to not be able to sell the property as the rest of the city is doing. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there another speaker? City, do you want to have any time for rebuttal? Or we'll just bring it back to the board?
Maybe one clarification that this
Okay.
does not change the regulations that apply, just who will be reviewing those regulations.
Go ahead.
A question, was this circulated on, were the people on Charles Avenue aware that this ordinance was coming up?
We didn't do special notification on this beyond our typical. Again, there's no change in the regulations.
Well, I wouldn't say that. I mean, we're here, so you're making some changes. I mean, it may be sort of insignificant in what you're saying, but, at the end of the day, you are making a change as far as you say who's reviewing it. And sometimes that can be more important than what's being reviewed. But why was there...
So the commission directive was in response to a perceived failure of UDRB acting in their role and allowing 2 very modern houses that do not follow the design guidelines as outlined. By any lay person looking at the design guidelines and looking at the structures that were approved, can see that there was something missing. So this is an attempt to bring the expertise aligned to the task at hand.
Well, my thing is, I just think, well, at least it should have been notified of this change.
I mean, standard notification procedures for bringing items, we didn't do, but we did not do specific outreach.
I know, but, Coconut Grove, it seems to be one of these places that, boy, one little change can, set, everybody on fire. So I think from every time we have something in Coconut Grove, like prior, it was always some issue. So I just got I hear what you're saying, but I just got a problem with that. That was not known, since it is such a specific area. What, 63 homes? I mean, it wouldn't have been that much of an issue as far as to do it, but whatever.
So when you say standard notice, so every property owner got the notice about this hearing? And the postings were put in the,
This item only requires an ad in the newspaper, the Miami
so
Herald.
they got less than, I'm gonna reinterpret, it's like it's less than normal. They didn't even get the normal to each resident. You had to read the paper to know about this.
No. You know what? Why am I? What is the standard that notice is given and notice is not given? Just for my clarification. Like in this particular case, you didn't have to give notification out. What is?
So a zoning text amendment is different than a rezoning or a special permit issuance. And I'll defer to hearing boards regarding specifics on notification.
But a text amendment can often have far-reaching effects. The UDB, the Urban Development Board, is it a recommending body only?
It is, and that's why, and as opposed to the Historic and Environmental Preservation Board, which is typically quasi-judicial, which is why we include that language limiting their power in this case to strictly being advisory.
I was wondering about that.
Yeah.
It looked like you were specifically limiting the HEP board's ability to interfere or to make these people's lives more complicated than they need to be. But the HEP board is, I mean, these gentlemen are correct, the HEP board is typically more stringent, that they look at detail more. You don't see as this putting a larger burden on the homeowners in that area?
I expect them to apply the existing regulations better than UDRB has. Yes. So is that a burden, or is that us attempting to do our jobs better? Maybe they're the same thing.
Are the design guidelines Grove design guidelines or Charles Avenue design guidelines?
It is the Village West Island Design Guidelines. So it applies to the commercial property. It applies to what is affect a couple of former SD districts under the previous zoning. So it's really Charles Avenue and the commercial corridors. And I can dig into it a little bit further if you want the specifics.
What did the UDRB do wrong?
They didn't really apply the guidelines. I mean, they didn't.
Are they represented by city staff?
City staff presents to them, and then they make recommendations. So
the city staff presented these houses that they think caused a problem and said, these have nothing to do with the design guidelines, and the UDRB said, don't care, we like what is presented.
I mean, I wasn't here. I'm not gonna speak on out of turn in terms of the specifics. We know the results are not great, and we know, at least in terms of the applicability of the standards, I'm not commenting on the architecture, just in terms of were the standards properly applied. So it was probably, in many of these things, you usually need a number of failures to overcome stopgaps. So I'm sure there was some failure in terms of possibly in enforcement. There might have been some failure in terms of staff taking whatever recommendations. So this at least takes one of the elements out of that potential.
Yeah, to me, I see it as the opposite. I think the city needs to take accountability of presenting these items properly in front of the right boards with the right information.
And I think the HEP board is the right board, as UDRB is not. It's not what they do. They don't apply design guidelines, and they don't review residential structures.
And why do they do that? Why do they do it in this case?
Why do they do?
Why did they, in ordinance, it says the URDB does this district?
Yes, that's what the current NCD, which was again, I don't know exactly the history of when it transitioned from 11,000 to Miami 21 regarding that specific element of it, that it was, I think there might have been an architectural review board before, and it transitioned to urban design review board.
I mean, honestly, I don't see the need for the change. I think I see a need for better oversight of the process. So I'll go to my next board member.
Is the submittal requirements the same? Like
the submittal nothing
are the
changes
same?
except for which board is reviewing.
Okay, so it's identical.
Mr. Parrish?
For once, I may know more about this subject than Jeremy. So what happened was in 2002, there was a major charrette that lasted for probably a week, hosted by the University of Miami and particularly Elizabeth Plater-Zyberk when they were, this was before Miami 21. And the result of that charrette, and it's a huge book which Jeremy has that was published saying re-envisioning the West Grove, and it was signed on by the Gibsons and the Wallaces and the Stirrups, and everybody was there. Lots of folks, well orchestrated, and produced a lot of documents. That then became the basis for the NCD 2, which, as Jeremy said, covers just the West Grove specifically, and it's in the code. And part of that NCD 2 specifically talks about Charles Avenue, which is also known as Evangelist Street. And Evangelist Street is the oldest street in the West Grove, which is probably the oldest, or one of the oldest, along with Overtown and the parts of the downtown of the city. And that street, Evangelist Street, now known as Charles Avenue, used to have, when I started building homes there, probably 20 or more shotgun houses, which now Mr. March owns one of them. They were all being preserved by the Blumenthal family way back when. And then they got divested and are now privately owned. And I think Mr. March is right in some aspects that the historic designation of the shotgun homes was not completely thought through. And it does impose restrictions on those people who own those houses. And the city is always undergoing a process to try to make it more palatable and equitable for the people who own those houses. And I think one of those things is they may allow auxiliary dwelling units, which are not now allowed in the T3R. There's also proposals for tax rebates. But so far, and I would agree with Mr. March, it's all been hot air, very, very few set-offs for the restrictions. But that said, the Village West as a whole, again, this is going on almost 20 years ago, came together and actually forced the city, forced is the wrong word, but got the city to do the NCD and to put in the guidelines, the architectural guidelines, which are, by the way, are in the code. If you go into the NCD and you pull up, there are actually drawings from that charrette throughout the NCD. And it's because it's what the people, the Bahamian and Georgian and South Carolinian residents got together and said, we would like to preserve our historic heritage. Now, 20 years later, you can say, well, a lot of them have died, some of them moved away, some of them sold, some of them made a lot of money. Grand Avenue's a mess. But basically, there was a promise made in 2002 to the then, probably at least back then, it was probably 80% African American, maybe higher. Now it's probably down to, God knows, 50, 25%. Who knows what the existing residents are. So things have changed, but still, that is part of the code. And definitely, in my opinion, the HEP board, as Jeremy said, is much more attuned to historic preservation. It's their specialty. I was astounded actually to learn that the UDRB is in charge of Charles Avenue, Evangelist Street. And I do think the HEP board takes into account the hardship that Mr. March was talking about. I do know Mr. De La Paz built his house expecting that others would build houses like his. It's a modern house. It's a very attractive house in some ways, but it definitely does not belong in that street, in my opinion. And until the people of the West Grove, and there's a whole contingent now who fought the stirrup project for the same reason Mr. March said, they don't want more commercial intrusion down that street. And so they're fighting that. They've gotten organized. They're both black and white together, have banded together to form a group to encourage the city to do speed traffic bumps on Charles Avenue, to restore the street, to perhaps give more benefits to people who have restored their homes like Mr. March has done. And all this is in process. So to make a long story short, I am 100% in favor of removing this from the purview of the UDRB and giving it to the HEP Board. The HEP Board has got architects on it. It's got people who very much care about historic preservation. And they have demonstrated over and over that they will come up with solutions that are fair and just and balance the interest of both the residents and the homeowners. Again, it's back to this property rights thing we were talking about earlier. But right now, there is a battle going on in the West Grove, because if all these restrictions were removed and the NCD was obliterated and it was open season, even more than it has been, all you have to do is go down north of Varick Park, down Day Avenue and Shipping Avenue. All those houses that were there are now duplexes selling for $1 million and up, probably now closer to $2 million. And yes, there is, as one of their residents here testified, there's a gold mine to be made there, and who's going to make the gold mine? So the residents of the West Grove have been saying over and over, we want to slow this down, we want to preserve our historic heritage, and one of the ways we do that is with the architecture, which is already in the code and which would be enforced by the Historic and Environmental Preservation Board. So this is good legislation, and even though there's a lot that has not been adequately explained, even some of our board members who are very attuned to what's going on in the city. This is a special area. Charles Avenue is a special street, and this is very good legislation. Even though I did take note of what the two testimonies that came here today, it always room for improvement, especially the burden that is pushed on some of these historic homes. But preserve Charles Avenue, it needs to go before the HEP Board.
The public comment is closed.
Just one thing I wanted to add.
Go ahead, Mr. Collins.
I'm in favor of the item. I do think that this board would offer more in terms of a review. But I do think it was a mistake that of the 64 houses that these, only to be notified in the newspaper, I think in this case, even though it may have been correct in the code, was a disservice to the street. I think that there should be more people here than two. So I would make a recommendation to defer the item to perhaps the second meeting in November, to allow the city to send mailers to every property owner that would be impacted with this proposed change.
Second?
Second.
Any discussion on it? City, do you understand the request if this motion passes? And that date of November 2nd is?
November 17th.
November 17th is good? Saying
That
yes?
should be fine.
All right, so we have a motion by Mr. Collins to defer to November 17th with distinct mailings and reach out to the impacted area.
It would be every property along Charles Ave is impacted by this proposed change, or?
So the Charles Avenue street itself is historically designated.
Okay.
So yes, it's the properties fronting Charles Avenue.
Okay, correct.
Okay, we have a motion and a second.
Who's the second?
Oh, yeah. Who's?
Mr. Ziegler.
Mr. Ziegler seconded.
Yeah, I second.
Call the roll, please.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mr. Ziegler,
Yes.
Mr. Parrish,
Yes.
Mr. Badillo,
Yes.
Mr. Mann,
Yes.
Ms. Torrance,
Yes.
Chair Garbaglia.
Does the city agree to this, so it doesn't count against us?
So it doesn't count against?
As a
No, this
deferral?
is your first deferral for 30 days or so. So you have 2 more for,
All right, just want to keep count, because keep the baseball analogy going. Yes,
Motion passes unanimously.
thank you. Last item?
PZAB 11, File ID 10654, a resolution of the Miami Planning, Zoning, and Appeals Board recommending approval to the City Commission of an ordinance of the Miami City Commission amending ordinance number 13114, the zoning ordinance of the City of Miami, Florida, as amended. More specifically, to amend Article 3, Section 3.3.3, Waterfront Standards, Section 3.11, Waterfront Standards, Article 5, Section 5.5, Urban Center Transit Zones, and Section 5.6, Urban Core Transit Zones, to grant flexibility regarding waterfront building setback requirements in conjunction with recent amendments to Appendix B, Waterfront Design Guidelines.
So you may recall that we recently amended Appendix B to greatly improve the design guidelines overall, and we also included a lot of language to bring it more in line with Miami 21. Again, this was a regulation that predated Miami 21. So we included language about primary frontages, which is, a defined term in Miami 21. But we did recognize that due to the waterfront nature of those sites, as opposed to being on a street where you really want the building to be on the street to form the edge and create an active front, that in this case on the waterfront, you should have some more flexibility. So again, those terms are like a frontage line that and this is all about just creating a good street edge, good public space adjacent to buildings. So what we realized is that this actually created a conflict in some of the language in the T5 and T6 transects. So we want to add language there that says, you have to have 70% of your building along a primary frontage or along the principal frontage line, and we want to make an exception for the waterfront side. And I'll go into some of that. So we're going to include this reference back to Appendix B, which is that language that says, as long as there's an active use along that frontage line, you can pull the building back. So an example of this is very much in line and was previously allowed and even encouraged. So we have projects along the river that are on very, very narrow sites. So if you have outdoor dining, if you have a covered terrace, you wouldn't actually meet the standards if we required 70% of the building to be on that waterfront line. And it might actually diminish the quality of the space along the water in that case. And another case would be where you have an amenity deck or like a pool at ground level on a building. Maybe they want a larger pool, so they want to have their building elevated a bit so that the pool can tuck under. Like that's already 50 feet back from the water. Like it's not that same condition that it is on the street side where you really want to maintain that edge. So this text amendment accounts for that and really allows us to get that intent that we already stated in Appendix B and removes the conflict from those properties. It has a couple other changes as well to make sure that we're not applying those principal frontage rules to waterfront properties that don't require the walkway. So T3, T4R properties, think, sort of further up the river. There was some confusion about the applicability of these. So this is some cleanup language for that. And then we have one additional item that's some additional cleanup, which is about for properties that have more than one frontage on the water. So we do two things here. I actually want to propose that we make a recommended text change from what is before you. We want to change the language from adjacent water body to adjacent body of water, because water body is a defined term in the code. Even though we don't capitalize it, it's definitely could add confusion. So we want to switch that around. But here's an example of a site that has really, it fronts two bodies of water. In this case, it's its own marina. A very, very strict interpretation of the code could require a setback along the river and along the marina, a side setback along the marina frontage. That's never the intent. So again, making it the greatest adjacent body of water. And so this would apply to sites on the bay where there's an inlet, and then really mostly what are marina sites, but any place where we have an inlet or something similar to this. And we did get an endorsement from unanimous endorsement from the Miami River Commission as well.
Are you going to read the letter?
I could read the letter. If you would like to spend some time, I could go through it.
I mean, generally, that letter gets read to us.
We'll be happy to share it.
No,
it is on the record here.
No, I'm good. That's it.
So any questions? That's it.
Any members of the public on this item would like to speak? Seeing none, bring it back to the board. Mr. Ziegler, did you have a question? Just saying hey. All right. Get your microphone a little closer. Thank you.
The devil's always in the details. I mean, I'm assuming this is just, as you say, something to clean up. But the issues as far as like, you know what? Never mind. Let's just go.
Vice Chair.
Jeremy, would you please read into the record the letter from the Miami River Commission? It looked like quite a lengthy letter just saying they endorse the changes.
I'm happy to.
Thank you.
Okay. No. Oh,
I find the endorsement of the Miami River Commission for anything that has to do with the waterfront exceedingly important to my decision making. So I appreciate you in entertaining me with the letter. Thank
sure.
you.
So I'll try and do
Really? We're going to make him read the whole letter?
I'll do a Barnaby Min impersonation and read it quickly.
It's in front of us. Was this part of our packet?
No, it was not.
This wasn't in your packet because it came in quite late.
Thank you, Jeremy.
So, during the Miami River Commission's October 4th, 2021 public meeting, Jeremy Gauger, City of Miami Deputy Planning Director, distributed and presented the administration's subject draft amendments to the waterfront standards in Section 3.11 of the City Zoning Code. The Miami River Commission adopted a unanimous resolution recommending approval of the City Administration's presented amendments to Section 3.11. And then we have a lengthy section that details the build-out of the riverfront walkway. Since the adoption of the Miami River Greenway Action Plan, 6.7 miles, 67.5% of the planned 10-mile public Miami River Greenway have been constructed to date, with an additional 3.25 miles remaining to be constructed. The public Miami River Greenway provides a safe alternative form of transportation for pedestrians and bicycles to live, work, and play in the most densely populated neighborhoods in the entire state of Florida, including Alapato, Little Havana, downtown, etc. The public Miami River Greenway is becoming a destination landscape attracting tourists and improving residents' quality of life from the area's multicultural neighborhoods by linking them to the Miami River and its 9 public parks. In addition, the Greenway is stimulating economic development along the Miami River, with 25 open restaurants and 22 more planned restaurants, over 11,910 new residential units, with an additional 6,667 approved residential units along the public Miami River Greenway. In addition, using the public Miami River Greenway improves personal, physical, and mental health while reducing vehicular traffic emissions and fuel consumption. Your time and continued strong support for the Miami River Greenway are appreciated. Sincerely, Brett Bobo, Managing Director, Miami River Commission.
Thank you. I'd like to make, no, I was going to make a motion.
Before you do, I would absolutely second the vice chair. The Miami River Commission has earned the respect that, for anything that happens on the river. And in particular, their managing director, Brett Bebo, who I knew when he first got out of college, and he basically undertook on his own to get the Miami River dredged, which he succeeded in doing, and now he's the managing director of the Miami River Commission. So I couldn't agree with the vice chair more about the respect that they are due.
Unanimous.
I'd like to make a motion to approve item number 11, zoning text, waterfront setbacks.
Second by Mr. Parrish. Call the roll, please.
Ms. Torrance?
Yes.
Mr. Parrish?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mr. Badillo?
Yes.
Mr. Ziegler?
Yes.
Mr. Mann?
Yes.
And Chair Garbaglia?
What happened to the letter? It's off my screen. I can't vote. Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
We have a motion to adjourn?
So there is one more item.
Mr. Ziegler, thank you for coming. Thank you.
Pardon.
I did give my.
We have one more item, I believe.
We have a motion to adjourn?
Well,
Mr. Chair, if I may.
you tabled PZ7. They'd like to bring it back. That was the item, PZ7 about parking.
Is that what you're waiting for? Okay. Do we need to hear it tonight?
Yes.
All right, it's already been read in the record. Who's going to present?
I will be presenting. So this is an extension.
The title was already read in the record.
It was.
It was already read in the record, yeah. So this is essentially an extension of the temporary parking program that previously existed. This will concentrate on the urban central business district. So this allows parking in vacant lots, essentially, and for a limited period of time. And for a limited time period, so up to, I believe, 5 years. So it limits the zoning from T3R, T3L, T3O. So it really concentrates it downtown. And there's a couple of changes from the previous interim temporary parking program.
Are you displaying anything? I didn't want to go. Was there
Sorry?
anything? There's nothing being displayed.
No, there's nothing being displayed. We're going to try and bring up the language for you, but it's the same language that was in which was in the package before.
And if I could just add a dovetail, it's here because while it's an amendment to Chapter 35 of the City Code, it does touch on elements of land use regulation. So as you are the land agency, it was appropriate to bring it to you. But it's largely a city commission change, and it's, as Jeremy said, it's reinstituting the temporary parking for, I guess, accessory parking.
Yeah, so it is a 5-year program. And because it's a temporary program, they can't be counted towards any entitlements or any zoning. Like they can't, you are able to lease off-site parking as part of buildings, particularly in downtown. But this can't be part of any of those types of applications. Some other salient features. There is a minimum 3-foot wide landscape buffer that's required, requiring a hedge 36 inches, not to exceed 42 inches. And some other improvements are to be made. Some parking lots that predate the program would need to be brought up fully compliant with Florida Building Code standards. So that starts to get into lighting requirements, drainage requirements, et cetera. And that is that is it in summary. I will do my best to answer any questions.
Opening it up to the public. Seeing none, bringing it back to the board. Comments or questions? Mr. Ziegler?
Yeah, what can be put on the ground? What, gravel, or does it have to be asphalt as far as the temporary parking? Is there any requirement as far as what material must be on the ground?
So I believe we are still requiring sort of minimum standards. Let me check to see if it's specified.
It's page 6 of 8.
Page 6.
It says parking lots shall be brought to grade with no less than 1 inch of asphalt over 4-inch lime rock base. It's essentially, it's requiring almost a real parking lot, making them meet the requirements for true parking, not on just crushed limestone, is my understanding.
Yeah, the only reason why I ask because, it's going to come back to those gravel type parking lot. The temporary ones, you put the rocks down, it's something temporary, but you can't do that. So you must asphalt it or at least concrete it, which probably won't concrete it, but I guess.
Keeping in mind that this is up to 5 years, so there's a real need to improve to a minimum standard.
But why does it say to allow unimproved parking on private property?
So, got 5 and 6.
Yeah, that was a big issue too, as far as what you can put down, because they're saying gas and oil can't drop into the ground. That's why they didn't like the gravel. So that's why I was asking what is the minimum that's going to be allowed to be put in there? I'm sorry.
So 5A on page 5, under design requirements.
Page 5. Can you put it up? Or you don't?
We're working on it. I'll read it in the meantime. Subsection 1, parking lots shall be brought to grade with no less than 1 inch of asphalt over 4-inch lime rock base. However, the Resilience and Public Works Director may require 6-inch lime rock base or thicker asphalt based upon the conditions at the site, the intensity at the site, or if trucks are intended to be parked on the site that would require additional support base. So surface stormwater shall not drain onto adjacent property or a public right-of-way, which is also standard, a typical standard.
Right, but I still don't get why does the wording on the ordinance say to reestablish the former temporary interim parking program to allow for conditionally unimproved and partially improved parking lots?
So they remain unimproved compared to what a minimum building code fully compliant parking lot would require, which includes landscape islands, curbs, the tree canopy, that all of those standards that are maintained in partly in Article 9 of Miami 21 regarding landscape requirements for parking areas. So that portion is waived. It doesn't mean unimproved in any way, shape, or form. So that's where the design requirements kick in.
Right, that's what I'm saying. That's a very expensive temporary to put catch basins and all of that, and you want asphalt now.
Well, it doesn't specify catch basins, so it does specify that you have to keep water on site. So there are a number of ways to do that besides full catch basins. That's probably the most economical, but for a site in the urban core, for 5 years of use, it becomes, I think, cost effective.
If I may?
Yes, you may.
We could defer and come back with more information, because it seems like the questions are really about the substrate, and you have more information that we might need a little more time to clarify for you.
I agree. It's just, I hear the wording, it could be some unintentional consequence, like you say. It's unimproved because of the way it's written.
But the design requirements are spelled out in that section. And that's what was applied to in the previous program as well.
And because of that, what you just said, why what's the point of this? Because basically you got to build a parking lot, even if
No.
it's a temporary 5 years.
No, so let me be clear. The requirements under the code, to do a permanent surface parking lot are much more stringent than what is included here. The surface is similar, yes, but the landscape requirements, the curbing requirements, the everything else, the lighting requirements are much more stringent than what is in this program. So
If I can allow me, I share Aaron's misgivings. The language that the chair just read, if you have an inspector or somebody who's not delving into the bowels of the code, it says that exactly what the chair just read, that it's excused from having to do a parking lot. And just let me finish, Jeremy. Yeah. I'm sure if we drive around any section of the city, we will see temporary parking lots that have been there for years that are allowing the gas and oil to drain right into the underneath. Because again, we come back to enforcement in the city is never what we would hope it would be. So I think that language has to be cleared up so that it's very clear, because the main comments that I heard from my fellow board members were worried about the oil and gas runoff into the aquifer and into the bay. And that's not clear from the language that's in this proposed ordinance that you have.
So
I could clarify that though, because when you search for the word unimproved, which is the alarming term, that is on page 3 of 8 in 35-290 parentheses B. It's the old language. So it's not being affected by this change. Nothing herein shall be deemed to preclude the continued use and permitting of conditionally improved, unimproved, and partially improved temporary parking lots as authorized pursuant to any other section of 62-543. The point I just wanted to bring up was that it's not new language. It's not allowing unimproved. It's just.
I'm ready to vote for this, but I'm not. I don't think it's clear that these temporary unimproved parking lots are going to be enforced so that we don't have oil and gas draining into the bay or into the aquifer. I don't think it's clear at all, George. I really don't. I think you have to go and look at all these other sections, and the inspectors that are going to go by are not going to have the code book with them and say, oh, that's what it means. No, I don't think it's clear.
And was the 5 years there before?
Sorry?
You said the 5 years, was that how it was before? The temporary, you said reinstate, it was 5 years before?
I know this was originally instituted in 2014, but I don't know the history enough to state that.
And you think 5 years is a good number for temporary?
I think it might be the sweet spot where people make the improvements and it can be revisited.
All right, what's the will of the board?
I don't think it's ready. I don't think it's ready.
If it's not ready, we can also defer. So,
but if I don't know that we can come up with Mr. Weissong can come up with some language that cures the main problem, which is the runoff, so that we don't require them to do handicap and curbs and gutters and lighting and all that. We're just concerned about the runoff.
Let me ask you, the intent was about, when I was reading that, I thought it was construction sites, where people building the tall buildings, they need parking, you're going to do that for temporary. That was the first thing that went in my mind, why the intent of this. Because it said temporary parking. I mean, nobody's going to spend all that kind of money to put a temporary parking up. I mean, unless... I just don't see someone going through that expense. I just want to
they certainly did in the previous pilot program, but keep in mind that construction sites, construction parking, that's a different section of the code. This is more akin to like a temporary use permit, where we see like along the river where people do major investments, and so because a 5-year duration, you can for downtown parking. That's going to create a pretty significant return on investment.
So where's the section that talks about what asphalt? You read something.
That's on page 5.
Can you scroll to that?
Page 5, section 5. And then there's a design requirements section.
So at minimum, they're going to get asphalt.
Yes.
Is that what I'm saying? Now, what's underneath the asphalt is debatable but by staff.
Well, lime rock, there's a lime rock base specified.
Right, but it could be 4 inches or 6 inches.
Right.
That's what's,
depending on the traffic loads. And Public Works can ask for additional asphalt depending on the traffic loads.
I'm okay with it. Now that I see that it's only asphalt, I kept reading it that it would just, you could just do rock without asphalt.
Yeah, and that's not
Okay.
possible.
I mean, I'm prepared to vote for it tonight. But
Jeremy, were there any issues in the past with compliance with the old language?
That I will defer. So we happen to have somebody with some experience on hand that, because for the most part, this predates me. You want to comment on that?
My name is Paula De Carolis. I used to work in the capacity of zoning manager, and we implemented the 5-year interim parking program. The objective was that somebody could come with an unimproved or poorly improved piece of land, and every year in a 5-year program, they would provide and improve until the objective was that at the end of the 5 years, you would get a complete surface parking, striped, repaved, drained, lit, and with landscaping. So the objective was to give them an opportunity so that in phases, in a 5-year term, they would create a better or a consistent surface parking with the requirements of Miami 21. What happened in the process is that the administrative part of following up with the applicant, coming into the city, and the maintenance of making sure that this program was incorporated and happened the way that it was meant to be was difficult from an administrative point of view.
But now we're going back to that same language, which was difficult to monitor.
Well, that's the part that I'm going to defer to Jeremy, because I can provide that from my past experience, that information on the history of it when I was in the capacity in zoning. And we were working with this program on a daily basis.
Thank you.
So I would say probably the biggest difference now, and something that is really meaningful, is that we're processing plans electronically. So being able to program in, like literally program in reminders, it's much easier to set up those systems where we are tasked and reminded to follow up programs that are further down the road.
But is that what this is doing every year? That lot gets better and better? Or is this, I thought I read this for 5 years, you get the basic lot.
For 5 years, you get the basic lot. And the idea is that, at the end of it, if you want a permanent lot, I think there's an ability, if it's otherwise allowable in the zoning ordinance, that you can make those improvements.
But it's not what the previous speaker said, that every year there's a incremental improvement to that property.
There's not a requirement for that incremental improvement.
And hopefully I don't make it worse, but if you look at section 62-543, it describes 5 different types of interim parking. First one is temporary special event parking. That's like you have a little event and you let people park on the grass. That's the only real reference to when unimproved parking is permitted, because it says 1, temporary special event parking. Temporary special event parking on unapproved interim parking lots as defined herein shall mean parking permitted pursuant to a temporary permit and only in conjunction with an approved special event that requires the additional parking to be accommodated on said lots. The fifth one is temporary parking, urban central business district. And when you look at that, that's paragraph 5, which talks about to take advantage of temporary parking, urban central business district, you have to do all those things Jeremy described, which is pave it, stormwater, landscape plan, signs, and lighting standards set forth in 35-288. They're not the true surface lot standards, but they're not allowing people to park on dirt or grass either. So it's a 5-year plan to allow people, I guess, to activate temporary surface parking lots that almost meet the full definition of a surface parking lot, is the way I read it.
So I've just been informed that we have, at some point, I'm not sure when, provided some incorrect information, so that in that case, I would ask for a deferral, apparently by the author of, so I'm not sure where we went astray. So I would respectfully request a deferral so that we do not put you in a position of voting for something.
So why don't you just withdraw it and come back when you're ready?
Yeah, I think it's very close, and we will be ready via deferral or continuance at that next meeting or at the second meeting in November.
November 17th?
Is that November 17th? Yep.
How's the agenda? Do we have any idea what the agenda looks like?
Only what's been deferred today.
Let me see.
Just a question, if I can.
No question. If it's going to be deferred, let's defer.
No, I just want to ask him a question for us. I just want to ask him what zoning that those parking lots are allowed on. That's all.
Let's see if we're going to defer it.
Yes.
Do I need a motion to defer to the 17th by Mr. Parrish, second by Mr. Vadillo? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Parrish?
Yes.
Mr. Vadillo? Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mr. Ziegler? Mr. Mann?
Yes.
Ms. Torrance?
Yes.
Chair Garavaglia?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Motion to adjourn.
Mr. Chair, before you adjourn,
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Before you adjourn, I just want to take 1 second to let you know there's a special treat. I think it's a special treat. At your next meeting, we'll have a special guest from the Department of the Office of Resilience and Sustainability. There's a discussion item. This is being offered to you in the vein of training. Her name is Alyssa Farina, and she'll be presenting for you sort of a rundown of the greenhouse gas reduction plan. So I just kind of want to share that with you. So it's another one of those sort of items that will be here for you guys just to take in. So that's queued up for the next meeting. That's it.
Good night, everyone.
You to wear a mask, to social distance, and to wash your hands continuously. That is the quickest way that we're going to be able to enjoy Miami Heat basketball live and to keep our